What's up, guys? Welcome back to Athlete University. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about joints. So we covered muscle contractions, we covered the types of agonists and antagonists yesterday, and then we also looked at levers. And so now that we have that basic understanding, we can actually look at the types of joints in the human body, which is a super important part of levers, and hopefully that'll help you get a better understanding of human anatomy, and eventually we'll stack on top of that, and I'll give you guys some relevant information at the end about hyaline cartilage, synovial fluid, etc. All right, so what are synovial, or what are joints, right? They're basically the way that our skeletal system is set up to create the lever system. They allow the bones to articulate with each other and move, and these are all the different types of joints. In more detail, more specifically, the first type of joint we'll go over is a hinge joint. So a hinge joint is basically a uniaxial, meaning it only moves in one plane, joint. A good example of one is in the elbow. Your elbow is a hinge joint. Obviously, if you can see this, that is how the joint works. It's pretty simple. All right, next one. We have a ball and socket joint. Ball and socket joint has the greatest freedom. Now, one thing you need to remember with joints is that the more freedom it has, typically the less stability it has. So you have a lot more articulating freedom for articulation. You have a lot of muscles crossing that joint, allowing for stability. So that's why we see the hip and your shoulder. You have so many different muscles that cross those joints. It gives us a lot of freedom for movement, but if you land in your shoulder in the wrong position, it's going to become unstable, and you might dislocate it or sublux it, which is a partial dislocation, which would be where that ball is pulled out of socket and then moved to the side. But this is an example in the hip. And then we have a saddle joint. So saddle joint, this is actually a picture of your thumb. So your thumb is a good example of that. You can see that it can rotate this way and rock back and forth like this, but then it can also rotate like this, right? So watching this or seeing that, guys, or if you can visualize with this image what that would actually look like, that's probably the best way to think about it. And as always, your body is kind of a cheat code when it comes to anatomy, right? Human anatomy. You just literally look at the joints in your body, and it's pretty easy to identify which one's which, just going from your toes to your head, right? So the saddle joint, the big one where it's easily seen is the thumb. This one, the big or the easy places it's seen is your shoulder and your hip. Pretty much the only two places, I think. And then hinge joints, we have your knee, which I'll get into this. It kind of falls. It's like a multi-dimensional hinge joint because it can rotate a little bit. So some people will say condyloid, which we'll get to a little later. And then your elbow, right? The tibial talus joint, I think might be a hinge joint as well. But a lot of the bones in the foot are a little bit tricky. So sometimes that can be a little bit convoluted. It could be a saddle joint, though, because you can go side to side. I don't know. I'd have to look that one up. All right, so then condyloid, this is what a condyloid looks like. The place you see this is your fingers, right? So your fingers, they can go this way, they can flex like this, right? And even if you wanted to, you could twist your fingers a little bit. The reason you can't really that much is because we have a lot of ligaments crossing the bones of our hands, which don't allow for that rotation. But technically, if you didn't have those, you could spin your finger around. And then plane joints. So these ones, back to this, by the way, these are usually biaxial. Usually they move in two planes. The three planes, which I haven't gone over yet, is sagittal, which is like this. And then you have frontal, which is like this. And then transverse, which is actually rotating like this, right? We have something called anatomical position. Just imagine you're standing up with your arms out. That is anatomical position. And when we talk about movements of different axes or joints, and we're talking about planes, we are looking always in anatomical position. It's really important to remember. All right, maybe we'll cover that in more detail another time. And then we have a plane joint. So a plane joint is when two bones slide past each other. This is typically one uniaxial, and you see it a lot in the carpals, which are the bones of your wrist, and also in your tarsals, which are the bones of your ankle and foot. These are really, really stable, and typically we don't want a lot of movement here. We need a lot of stability. They can move a little bit, but ideally we don't want a ton of freedom of movement. We need a lot of stability. Like I said, that relationship, right? The more freedom you have, the less stable it is. And then we have a pivot joint. So a pivot joint is the radius and ulna is a good example. So your ability to do this, that's actually this joint right here. Your radius is rotating around the ulna, and that's why you're able to rotate your hand like this or open a doorknob. These are just some illustrations of what it looks like, right? We also have a pivot joint in our neck, and that's what allows us to rotate our head. All right, so those are all the joints, and I could go through and maybe quiz you guys on this, but kind of covered most of the relevant ones, right? I mean, we covered the neck, we covered the shoulder, elbow, wrist is kind of a mix of a bunch of different ones, but probably condyloid. There's some flat or planar joints in there with your carpals. We've got condyloid. We've got a saddle joint in the thumb. So your hand is really complex, and so is your ankle and foot. If you have like a foot or ankle injury, or you ever have, there's specialists for that for a reason, because it's super complex. Typically in dunking and jumping and sprinting, we don't usually see that many wrist injuries, maybe some wrist injuries like on a clean catch, but it's never really limiting. We do see a lot of ankle injuries, in which case, it's usually related to the ligaments, and that's involving the plantar joints usually. Sometimes it's other ones, but generally that's where those issues are arising. Anyways, we also want to cover the joint structure. So each joint has hyaline cartilage. So anytime you have two bones coming like in contact with each other, you're going to have hyaline cartilage. And you're also going to have around that hyaline cartilage a fluid, which we call synovial fluid. So whenever you guys hear us say like PFP or chondromalacia, what that is the wearing away of the chondro means cartilage, of the cartilage in the articular cartilage of the joint. The specific articular cartilage is hyaline cartilage. If you guys have ever seen, and this might gross some of you at, a drumstick, if you look at the end of the drumstick over here, that's actually, and you've ever felt that, and it's kind of greasy and smooth, that is hyaline cartilage. That's what that is. And if you eat it, maybe you'll get more of it. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely high in collagen. Try it. Let me know. But yeah, that is one of the most important structures that I look at in our athletes. Obviously, we look at tendons, but a lot of the issues I see happen in that articular cartilage. If guys have pain and it's not specifically on the bone, because bones are so strong, and it's not in the tendon, and it's not deep inside the knee, so it's not a ligament, it's usually going to be related to this articular cartilage. You guys have probably seen this before, but you'll have athletes that'll talk about like draining fluid out of their knee. This is the specific fluid they're talking about. It's not blood. Usually it's clear or somewhat clear when they drain it. And that's just your body trying to get nutrients and deliver nutrients to that joint. This joint actually weeps that fluid, and that's to lubricate the joint. That's why it becomes swollen a lot of the time. Like I know Billy Duran and Jay Clark, you guys have had your knees swell up. Jay Clark had an ACL injury. Billy has a meniscus injury. And as a result, their joint capsule, I think Jay Clark had a meniscus injury too. That cartilage is secreting synovial fluid, or at least stimulating the secretion of synovial fluid. It builds up in the joint, and then sometimes you can get it drained, and yeah, it makes you feel good. All right. Like I said, hyaline cartilage here, guys. You can see what happens when it wears away. This is the hip joint. That would cause a lot of issues, obviously, right? If you wear away your hyaline cartilage, that's when you need a hip replacement usually. That's when you need a knee replacement. You could technically live your whole life with it, but a lot of people are in a lot of pain. My big thing is treat symptoms. So even if you did see this stuff on a scan, if you're not in pain, or I'll give you an analogy, imagine that you were perfectly pain-free for your entire life, like you had no issues, but then under a scan you were like in shambles, but you died completely pain-free, you had full range of motion and full function? Or would you rather be perfect under a scan, but you have a ton of pain, right? Obviously, I'd rather have full function and not give a shit about what it looks like under a microscope. So big key takeaway there as well. And then obviously I showed you guys this, but yeah, that's basically it. That's joints. I hope that was helpful for you guys. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Next week is dunk camp, so I might not be doing these videos. Maybe I will. I don't know. Might interview Jay Clark or Steven Selly, or I don't know. Some of the people I don't get to see super often. All right. See you guys.